Something big just dropped, but instead of answers, it's only raising more questions. The long-awaited Epstein files have finally started to surface, and what's inside? Not nearly enough. The U.S. government has just released what it calls Phase 1 of the investigation's documents. But here's the problem. It's not the full story. The Department of Justice is now accusing the FBI of hiding key records, demanding they hand over the rest. And this isn't just a bureaucratic delay. The Epstein case has been a storm of secrecy and controversy for years, and now that storm is only growing stronger. The official story? Epstein was found dead in his Manhattan jail cell in 2019, reportedly by self-harm. But many believe his death was far more suspicious, possibly an orchestrated move to keep him silent before he could expose the powerful figures connected to his trafficking network. So what's actually inside these newly released files? And what's buried in the thousands of missing pages? Let's dig in. The first batch of documents included more than 100 pages of flight logs, listing the names of people who flew on Epstein's infamous private jet between 1991 and 2006. It also included a heavily redacted list of masseuses, along with records of evidence seized from Epstein's homes in New York and the Virgin Islands. Sounds like big news, right? Well, here's the problem. Most of this information had already been made public in previous court cases. The flight logs? Old news. They had already been released during the trial of Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's longtime associate who was convicted of child trafficking in 2021. The evidence list? Interesting but vague. It confirms that federal agents seized cash, passports under multiple identities, hard drives, and a mountain of digital storage devices from Epstein's properties. But what's actually on those devices? That's still a mystery. And then there's the biggest question. Why was this just Phase 1? Attorney General Pam Bondi made a shocking revelation. She was directly told by an FBI source that thousands of additional pages exist, documents that weren't included in the release. These files could contain communications, surveillance footage, financial records, or even detailed client lists that expose exactly who was involved in Epstein's operations. So let's talk about this missing information. If these records exist, they could be the key to unraveling Epstein's entire network. Think about it. Epstein's properties were wired with cameras in every room, and he was known for collecting dirt on powerful people. If those surveillance tapes still exist, they might contain direct evidence of criminal activity. And here's where things get really messy. Bondi's letter to FBI Director Kash Patel wasn't just a casual request. She demanded full compliance by 8 a.m. on February 28th. She wants every single document, every recording, every email, and every photograph that's connected to Epstein and his clients. No exceptions, no redactions. Now, if you're thinking, wait, doesn't the Attorney General outrank the FBI? You're absolutely right. The FBI reports directly to the Department of Justice, meaning there's no legal reason for them to withhold these files. And yet, that's exactly what they did. So what happens next? That depends on whether the FBI actually meets this deadline. If they fail to produce the missing documents, things could escalate fast. Bondi has already ordered a full investigation into why the FBI didn't comply, demanding answers within 14 days. And let's be real. If major evidence was intentionally withheld, someone inside the Bureau is going to have a lot of explaining to do. And here's the kicker. This isn't just about Epstein. The FBI is already under pressure to declassify files on other major cases, including the assassinations of John F. Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy, and Martin Luther King Jr. If the Epstein files are getting the same treatment as those, it raises serious concerns about what else is being hidden. Now let's talk about the people tied to Epstein in these documents. Some names have been floating around for years. Former President Bill Clinton was listed as a passenger multiple times in 2002 and 2003, reportedly accompanied by Secret Service agents. He has denied any wrongdoing, saying his flights were for charity work in Africa. But here's where things don't add up. One of Epstein's alleged victims testified under oath that she saw Epstein and Clinton together and only learned they were friends after reading about it in a Vanity Fair article. So either they had a closer relationship than Clinton admits, or there's something else being hidden. And then there's this. Epstein allegedly told her that Clinton liked them young. Now that's a statement that raises 1,000 questions. Was this Epstein bragging? Was it true? Was it meant as an inside joke? There's no solid proof that Clinton ever engaged in illegal activity, and to be fair, the witness later clarified that she never actually met Clinton or saw him on Epstein's private island. But the fact that Epstein made that comment at all is disturbing, to say the least. When these legal documents started surfacing in 2019, Clinton's team scrambled to distance him from the scandal. A spokesperson released a statement saying that Clinton knew nothing about Epstein's crimes, and that he only took 4 trips on Epstein's private jet between 2002 and 2003. The official claim? These were strictly for Clinton Foundation work in Europe, Asia, and Africa, with Secret Service agents accompanying him at all times. Sounds pretty airtight, right? Well, not exactly. The flight logs do show Clinton on multiple trips, but there have been conflicting reports about exactly how many times he flew with Epstein. Some sources say it wasn't 4, it was 26. And then there's the issue of who else was on those flights. Epstein's private jet, nicknamed the Lolita Express, wasn't just a means of travel. It was allegedly a mobile crime scene. Victims have described being flown to private locations, including Epstein's properties, where they were assaulted by powerful men. And Clinton isn't the only former president with ties to Epstein. Donald Trump's name also appears multiple times in Epstein's flight logs, mostly in the early 1990s. One entry from May 1994 shows Epstein flying with Trump, his then-wife Marla Maples, their daughter Tiffany, and Tiffany's nanny. Another log from 1995 lists Eric Trump as a passenger. Now Epstein and Trump were well acquainted. There's plenty of footage of them together at parties, including a 1992 video of Trump laughing and whispering with Epstein at Mar-a-Lago, surrounded by young women. But Trump has repeatedly denied knowing about Epstein's crimes. In 2019, after Epstein's arrest, Trump even went as far as to say, "I was not a fan of his." But let's not forget, when Epstein first ran into trouble with the law in 2008, Trump was one of the only high-profile people who actually cooperated with the investigation. Unlike Clinton, whose team put out carefully worded denials, Trump provided information to prosecutors. So what about Prince Andrew? His name has been tied to Epstein for decades, and he has never been able to shake the controversy. One of Epstein's most well-known victims, Virginia Giuffre, formerly Virginia Roberts, has accused Prince Andrew of assaulting her multiple times when she was 17. She claims Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell forced her into these encounters, and she even provided a photo of herself standing next to Andrew, with Maxwell smiling in the background. The prince's response? Denial. Andrew gave an infamous BBC interview in 2019 where he tried to explain why the allegations couldn't be true. He said he didn't remember ever meeting Giuffre, claimed the photo was doctored, and then, in a bizarre twist, insisted that he couldn't have been sweating on the night in question because he had a medical condition that prevented him from sweating. Needless to say, no one believed him. In 2022, he settled out of court with Giuffre for an undisclosed amount, rumored to be millions of dollars. And in the fallout, the Queen stripped him of all his royal titles and military honors. So, with all these high-profile figures tied to Epstein, why hasn't anyone else been arrested? Let's go back to 2008. That's when Epstein managed to pull off one of the biggest legal escapes in history. It started when the parents of a 14-year-old girl reported to Palm Beach police that Epstein had paid their daughter to give him a massage. But when investigators started digging, they uncovered something far bigger, a full-blown trafficking operation. Epstein had allegedly set up a system where young girls were recruited to provide him massages that often escalated into something far worse. The police collected dozens of witness statements, found explicit photos inside Epstein's mansion, and identified more than 30 underage victims. Normally, that would have been enough for serious federal charges. But then, something shady happened. Instead of going to trial, Epstein cut a secret plea deal with the U.S. Attorney's Office in Florida. The deal, negotiated by then-prosecutor Alex Acosta, allowed Epstein to plead guilty to lesser state charges of solicitation and procurement of minors. His sentence, 18 months in jail. But that wasn't even the shocking part. Epstein only served 13 months, and most of that time was spent on work release. You heard that right. Epstein was allowed to leave jail during the day, go to his office, and then return to a private wing of the jail at night. That's not prison. That's house arrest with extra steps. And while he did have to register as a sex offender, he avoided the more serious federal charges that could have put him away for life. Fast forward a decade later. Epstein was finally arrested again in 2019, this time on federal sex trafficking charges. But before he could stand trial, he was found dead in his Manhattan jail cell. The official cause of death? Self-harm. But the circumstances surrounding Epstein's death are so suspicious that even people who don't believe in conspiracy theories have raised their eyebrows. Let's break it down. Just weeks before his death, Epstein was found semi-conscious on the floor of his cell with marks around his neck. His cellmate at the time, a former police officer facing 4 counts of murder, was questioned but denied any involvement. Some reports suggested that Epstein had tried to take his own life. Others hinted that it was an attack. There was even speculation that the entire event was staged to justify putting him under heavier security. And for a brief moment, it seemed like the system was working. Epstein was placed on suicide watch, where he was supposed to be closely monitored. But within just 6 days, that watch was lifted. Why? Officials claimed he had shown no signs of distress. Then, on the night of August 9, 2019, Epstein's last cellmate was removed. No new one was assigned. That same night, guards failed to check on him for 3 hours, breaking protocol. 2 of them even fell asleep on duty. They later falsified records to cover up their failure. And here's where things get even stranger. Both security cameras outside Epstein's cell malfunctioned at the exact time of his death. Let that sink in. Epstein was found motionless in his cell at 6:30 a.m. on August 10, 2019. Emergency responders arrived, but it was too late. Within hours, officials declared it a self-inflicted death. But the autopsy results? They tell a different story. Among Epstein's multiple broken bones, one stood out, the hyoid bone, a small structure in the throat. While this bone can break in hangings, it is far more common in cases of manual strangulation. One study found it in just 6% of hanging cases, but in a large percentage of homicide victims. Dr. Michael Baden, an independent pathologist who observed the autopsy, called Epstein's injuries extremely unusual and suggested that his death was more consistent with homicidal strangulation. And it wasn't just the injuries. Epstein had signed his final will just 2 days before his death, transferring his entire fortune into a trust. For someone who supposedly had no plans to face trial, he was certainly making long-term moves. Then came the fallout. Attorney General William Barr called Epstein's death a major failure and launched an investigation. 2 prison guards were charged with falsifying records and later admitted to their actions in court. Yet despite the countless red flags, officials stuck to their story. And now, with thousands of pages of evidence still missing, the biggest question remains: who else knew about Epstein's operation? Because let's be real, this wasn't a one-man operation. The fact that Epstein had hundreds of contacts in his address book, a heavily redacted list of masseuses, and an evidence list filled with hard drives, VHS tapes, and cash-filled envelopes tells us one thing: there's more to this story. And now, things just got even messier. The FBI met its deadline and turned over thousands of new documents on Epstein. But here's the twist: they might not see the light of day. Attorney General Pam Bondi announced that some files will be redacted for national security reasons. Hold on, national security? What exactly does a convicted sex trafficker have to do with national security? That's the question everyone is asking. And the answers? Well, they're only making this whole situation more suspicious. Bondi claims that the FBI and the Southern District of New York withheld these documents for years. According to her, the Justice Department had to retrieve them from the SDNY office, where Epstein was being tried before his death. And now, we're hearing that some of these documents might never be released. Think about that for a second. Why would a case like this, one that should be open and shut, be so tangled up in secrecy, missing files, and last-minute redactions? Why would a man like Epstein, who ran a global trafficking network, have information that could be considered a threat to national security? Unless he wasn't acting alone. For years, there have been rumors that Epstein wasn't just a wealthy predator. He was also an intelligence asset. Some believe he worked for the CIA, Mossad, or both, running a honeypot operation to trap powerful men with compromising material. And the theory goes that these tapes, the same ones listed in the FBI's evidence logs, were meant to blackmail the most powerful people on Earth. Wild? Maybe. But look at the facts. Epstein escaped justice for years, despite law enforcement knowing about his crimes. The plea deal he struck in 2008, one of the biggest legal cover-ups in history, was allegedly arranged by Alexander Acosta, who later served as Trump's labor secretary. And according to reports, Acosta told officials that he was told to back off Epstein because he belonged to intelligence. And it doesn't stop there. Epstein's partner in crime, Ghislaine Maxwell, is the daughter of Robert Maxwell, a publishing tycoon with deep ties to Israeli intelligence. Some have speculated that Ghislaine continued her father's work, using Epstein's trafficking network to gather leverage over influential men. If any of this is even partially true, then the missing files the FBI just turned over might be the most explosive evidence yet. But here's where it gets even more bizarre. Bondi's first document dump turned out to be a massive letdown. She held a highly publicized event at the White House where she handed out binders labeled Epstein Files Phase 1. The problem? The binders contained almost nothing new. People expected bombshell revelations, but what they got were recycled documents, flight logs, and depositions that had already been made public years ago. Even Trump's closest allies were furious. Far-right influencers called the release a complete disappointment, and some even accused Bondi of staging the release for publicity. Behind closed doors, White House officials were scrambling to contain the fallout, privately reaching out to critics to smooth things over. And here's the kicker. Bondi never told Trump's team she was going to do this. She thought it would be a big win, but instead, it turned into a major embarrassment. So to save face, Bondi went on Fox News and blamed the FBI. She claimed they were hiding even more files and that she had now acquired a truckload of new documents from the SDNY. But will these new files actually tell us anything we don't already know? Here's where things get tricky. According to investigative journalists who have followed this case for years, 10,000 heavily redacted pages are already available on the FBI's website. Many of these files were released years ago under Biden's administration. So if the newly released documents end up being just another repackaging of old information, then this whole thing might be a political stunt, designed to make it look like new information is coming out when in reality we're just seeing the same old data. But if the national security redactions are real, that's when things get scary. Because it would mean that Epstein's operations were so deeply entangled with powerful institutions that exposing the truth could be a threat to the entire system. And one last thing. After the latest round of document releases, James Dennehy, the head of the FBI's New York field office, was forced to resign. No explanation was given. No public statement, just gone. Coincidence? Maybe. But it definitely raises some questions. So here we are. 5 years after Epstein's death, we still don't have the full truth. Instead, we have delays, missing files, national security redactions, and a web of corruption that keeps getting messier. Will we ever get the real story, Or is this just another case where the powerful protect their own? What do you think? Drop a comment below, and don't forget, subscribe and turn on notifications. There's more coming and you won't want to miss it.